the unwanted dog. Duke pressed his nose against the cool wire of his kennel, watching yet another fluffy terrier prance out with a beaming new owner. 2 years. 73 dogs had found homes since he'd arrived. A lean, anxious shadow of the noble German shepherd he was meant to be. He'd seen them all come and go, their barks of joy echoing through the concrete halls long after he was left behind. Later that afternoon, a young family approached his run, their faces bright with hopeful smiles. Sarah Jenkins, the shelter manager, unlatched the gate, her expression a careful blend of optimism and apprehension. "This is Duke," she said gently, her hand resting momentarily on his broad shoulder. "He's a very intelligent dog." As the father bent down, extending a tentative hand, his young son, excited, suddenly darted forward. Duke flinched, a low, rumbling growl vibrating in his chest, his eyes fixed warily on the boy's quick movement. The child recoiled, startled. The mother gasped, pulling her son protectively closer. Sarah sighed, her shoulders slumping almost imperceptibly as the family retreated, their hopeful smiles replaced by hurried apologies. Back in her office, the fluorescent lights hummed a weary tune. Sarah opened Duke's digital file, the cursor blinking next to Temperament test results. She typed in the latest incident, the words unpredictable reactivity, a familiar, disheartening refrain. She knew Duke wasn't inherently aggressive, but his responses were ingrained, almost automatic. It broke her heart to update his status to unadoptable, a label that felt like a life sentence. She wished there was another way, a different approach, anything to unlock the loyal dog she sometimes glimpsed beneath the layers of fear and ingrained caution. A familiar glimpse. The shelter pulsed with a symphony of canine voices and the hushed drone of air purifiers. Mr. Miller ambled through the central corridor, his gaze drifting across the enclosures, not searching for a pet, but simply observing. He moved with an unhurried elegance, a composed figure amidst the eager pandemonium of the hopeful dogs. Most pressed against the wire, tails thrumming, clamoring for his notice. He acknowledged them with a gentle glance, a silent affirmation. His path led him to Duke's run. As he drew near, a sharp, guttural bark exploded, instantaneous and jarring. Duke, a sinewy German shepherd, recoiled against the farthest wall, his posture rigid. His eyes, wide with apprehension, held a profound intensity that captured Mr. Miller's focus. He observed Duke's head snap leftward, a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor rippling through his frame before he locked still, a taut sculpture of alarm. Miller's thoughts began to coalesce. That recoil, the instant retreat to the left, the sudden immobility. This wasn't indiscriminate aggression, nor mere timidity. He'd witnessed it before, countless times, in myriad contexts. A practiced response, a conditioned reaction to a perceived menace, almost textbook in its execution. The dog wasn't striking out. He was responding with a meticulously honed defensive posture, a calculated withdrawal. Not erraticism, but exactitude. Someone had instilled that in him. A spark kindled in Miller's steady gaze. He perceived something beyond the fear and the superficial label. He saw reflections of his own history mirrored in Duke's guarded bearing. An unusual request. "He's not aggressive, Ms. Jenkins. He's reacting to a trigger, a conditioned response." Mr. Miller's voice was steady, his gaze fixed on Duke's enclosure. Sarah, leaning against the counter, rubbed her temples. The afternoon sun, usually a cheerful presence, only highlighted the dust motes dancing in the air, mirroring her own weariness. "Mr. Miller, I appreciate your insight, but we've had 12 incidents. 12 families, 12 times he's lunged or snarled when someone reached for him too quickly or raised their voice." She gestured vaguely towards Duke's file, a thick folder labeled in red, "Unadoptable, severe reactivity." "It breaks my heart, truly, but we have to prioritize safety. For the families, for our staff, and frankly, for Duke himself." Mr. Miller turned, his eyes holding a depth that surprised her. "I understand your reservations completely, but I'm not asking to test him. I'm asking to simply sit with him, alone. For an hour. No leashes, no treats, no sudden movements, just quiet presence. Sarah's eyebrows shot up. Alone? Mr. Miller, that's highly irregular. What if he does what he's done before? We can't risk that. The memory of the volunteer's bitten hand still haunted her. He won't, Mr. Miller said, his tone unwavering. Not if I'm right about what I'm seeing. Trust me, Ms. Jenkins. Sometimes the most unusual requests yield the most profound results. He offered a small, reassuring smile that held a flicker of something she couldn't quite place. A quiet conviction that chipped away at her resolve. The quiet hour. The heavy steel door clanged shut, a sound that usually sent a tremor through Duke. Today, however, Mr. Miller's slow, deliberate movements seemed to absorb the shock. The room was sparsely furnished, painted a calming muted gray, and smelled faintly of disinfectant and old dog. Mr. Miller didn't look at Duke. Instead, he angled his body slightly away, sinking onto a low stool, his gaze fixed on a distant corner of the ceiling. He moved with the quiet grace of someone accustomed to wild things, his hands resting open on his knees, palms up. Duke, initially bristling, let out a low, rumbling growl that quickly dissolved into a questioning whine. He paced the perimeter of the room, his nose twitching, taking in the scent of this new, unthreatening presence. The man offered no commands, no lures, no sudden movements. After several tense minutes, the rhythmic thump of Duke's tail against the floor became almost imperceptible, a hesitant punctuation to the silence. His barking ceased. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Duke began to narrow the gap. He stopped a few feet from Mr. Miller, head low, eyes still watchful but less fierce. The quiet man remained still, a statue of patience. Finally, with a soft huff, Duke nudged Mr. Miller's outstretched hand with his wet nose. A gentle scratch behind the ears, a feathery touch, and the dog leaned into the contact, a profound exhale escaping his lungs. The tension that had bound him for so long began to unravel. Going home. Sarah Jenkins peered through the reinforced glass, her heart a tangled knot of apprehension and disbelief. Duke, the dog she'd long labeled unadoptable, lay with his head resting gently on Mr. Miller's knee, a soft sigh escaping his powerful chest. The man stroked Duke's fur with a rhythmic calm that spoke of innate understanding. There was no bristling, no tense jaw, just an almost tender exchange that Sarah had never witnessed. Her weary shoulders, usually hunched with the weight of Duke's plight, straightened fractionally. Hope, a fragile butterfly, fluttered in her chest. Minutes later, Mr. Miller was at the counter, filling out the adoption forms with a steady hand. Sarah, still dazed, processed the paperwork. Each stroke of his pen on the adoption agreement felt like a small victory. He seemed to take to you, she managed, the understatement barely covering her astonishment. Mr. Miller simply smiled, a quiet knowing in his eyes. As they walked out into the late afternoon sun, Duke's leash was slack in Mr. Miller's hand. The dog, instead of pulling or shying, ambled beside him, occasionally glancing up with an expression Sarah could only describe as contentment. The shelter door closed with a soft click, sealing a chapter and opening another. Sarah watched them go, a genuine smile finally gracing her lips. New beginnings. Months melted into a comfortable rhythm. Duke, initially a shadow in the corners, gradually claimed the sunbeam by the window as his own. His explorations began tentatively, a sniffing nose charting the perimeter of each room, a slow wag of his tail the only indication of approval. Mr. Miller gave him space, a silent invitation to settle in at his own pace. Their mornings began with a shared breakfast, the clinking of Duke's bowl a familiar sound. Then came the walks. Mr. Miller kept the leash loose, allowing Duke to lead the way through the quiet neighborhood streets. A soft heel Duke was usually all it took, and the German shepherd would fall into step, his gait smooth and purposeful. The flinching at sudden movements near his left side had lessened, replaced by a quick glance at Mr. Miller, a silent question that was always met with a reassuring hand on his head. Evenings brought a peaceful stillness. Duke often lay by Mr. Miller's feet as he read, the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest a comforting presence. One blustery night, a clap of thunder rattled the windows. Duke, instead of retreating, nudged Mr. Miller's hand with his wet nose, then rested his head on his lap. Mr. Miller stroked the soft fur behind Duke's ears, feeling the dog's warmth radiating through his jeans. It was a silent testament to a trust hard won, a promise of new beginnings blooming in the quiet space between them. The bad nights. The moon, a sliver of bone against the inky sky, offered little light through Mr. Miller's bedroom window. He lay on his back, eyes wide open, the soft click of the old house settling echoing the frantic beat of his heart. Sleep felt like a forgotten country, replaced by the relentless reel of memories. The sharp crack of distant gunfire, the metallic tang of fear, the chilling silence that followed. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to force them away, but the images only intensified, vivid and unrelenting. His breathing grew shallow, a tight knot forming in his chest. Duke, usually a creature of habit, slept soundly on his plush dog bed in the corner, a low rumble emanating from his chest. But tonight, the subtle shift in the air, the faint tremor in the old man's breathing, pulled him from his slumber. His ears twitched, then pivoted towards the bed. He lifted his head, dark eyes scanning the room, finally settling on Mr. Miller's rigid form. A soft whine escaped him, unheard by his distressed human. Hesitantly, Duke slid off his bed, his paws making no sound on the carpet. He padded across the floor, his tail hanging low, a silent sentinel approaching a troubled soul. Reaching the edge of the bed, he nudged Mr. Miller's hand with his wet nose. When there was no response, he rested his head gently on Mr. Miller's lap, a warm, weighty presence, his breath soft against the worn fabric of the pajamas. Mr. Miller's racing mind faltered, the phantom sounds fading, replaced by the comforting thrum of Duke's quiet purr. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and buried his fingers in the thick fur of Duke's neck. A silent helper. The familiar cold sweat plastered Mr. Miller's nightshirt to his back. The shadows on the ceiling morphed into the jagged silhouettes of a collapsing building, the distant wail of a siren a phantom echo in his ears. He sat bolt upright, gasping, the terror of a forgotten battlefield still sharp in his mind. For years, these nights had been a solitary torment, a relentless replay of moments he wished he could erase. He tried everything. Medication, therapy, endless cups of calming tea, but the darkness always found its way in. A gentle nudge against his hand broke through the haze. Duke, who had been curled at the foot of the bed, now rested his chin on the mattress, his amber eyes reflecting the dim glow of the alarm clock. There was no whine, no frantic movement, just a steady, reassuring gaze. Mr. Miller reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and buried his fingers in the thick fur behind Duke's ears. The dog leaned into the touch, a low, resonant rumble vibrating in his chest. The simple act of petting, the warmth of Duke's body beside him, began to unravel the tight knot of fear in Mr. Miller's chest. He felt the tension in his shoulders ease, the frantic rhythm of his heart gradually slow. He had spent countless hours battling these nightmares alone, but Duke's quiet presence, his unyielding calm, was something entirely new. It wasn't a cure, not yet, but it was a reprieve, a small pocket of peace in the storm. Duke remained still, a sentinel against the lingering shadows, his silent vigil a testament to an unspoken understanding. Reassigned to duty. The phone rang, a jolt in the quiet hum of the shelter office. Sarah Jenkins answered, expecting another inquiry about a fluffy kitten. Instead, a deep, raspy voice filled her ear. "This is Mr. Miller. About Duke." Sarah's heart hitched. She braced for bad news, a complaint about the unadoptable dog. But Mr. Miller's next words were a revelation. "Last night, I had one of the worst ones. The walls were closing in, the memories. I was spiraling. Then Duke, he just came over, nudged my hand, then lay his head on my chest. His breathing, it was like a steady anchor. The panic faded. He just knew. A wave of emotion washed over Sarah. Tears pricked her eyes as she listened to the man describe Duke's gentle, unwavering presence. The dog who had terrified shelter staff, the one marked for failure, had found his purpose. He wasn't aggressive. He was perceptive, a silent sentinel. The ranger hadn't just adopted a dog. He'd found a partner. Later that afternoon, a sense of profound vindication propelled Sarah to Duke's digital file. She scrolled past the litany of failed temperament tests, the red flags for reactivity. With a determined click, she deleted the unadoptable tag. In its place, she typed, her fingers trembling slightly, "Reassigned to duty." A quiet triumph bloomed in her chest. Duke wasn't just adopted. He was home, fulfilling a destiny only Mr. Miller had seen.